The Armenian literary historian Hagop Oshagan classifies Siamanto among the generation of writers who created the aesthetic literary movement. He also considers Siamanto to represent one of the peaks of Western Armenian lyrical poetry, along with Daniel Varujan, Vahan Tekeyan, and Misak Mezarets. Siamanto dedicated his literature entirely to the sufferings of Armenian people and its rise against tyranny. While other contemporary poets reflected on their personal feelings, their anxieties, and their loves, Siamanto has left no record of any poetry focusing on love or his personal emotions. Rumor has it that at one point in his life he has destroyed his youthful creations which featured his love and intimate sentiments, to leave only in his legacy poetry dedicated to the Armenian people, its struggles, its suffering, its hopes, and its future. He was well read in European literature, and especially the French literature. He was the one and perhaps the only poet who introduced the free verse in Armenian poetry, inspired by the French poet Émile Verhaeren. He led a nomadic life until he met his tragic death in the hands of the Ottoman Turks. Siamanto was born in 1878 in the town of Agan. Agan is one of the cradles of Armenian bards, minstrels, who were famous through the Middle Ages, and we have Agna Hayrenner, most of them by anonymous poets who used to create and roam from one village to the other, reciting their creations. And Siamanto, in a way, is the modern successor of those Agan troubadours or minstrels, who was born in, as I said, in 1878 on Agan, which is on the banks of Euphrates. He lived in his town until the age of 14. Siamanto came from a middle-class family. He moved to Constantinople in 1891, where he continued his studies in the Berberian Institute. Retios Berberian was a great teacher, writer, instructor, and there are many prominent poets like Indra, Vahan Tekeyan, who have been trained at Berberian school. Technically, it was a high school in modern terms, but it gave great poets and writers to the Armenian people. He graduated in 1896 during the same year of the bloody Hamidian massacres. Like many other intellectuals, he fled the country for fear of persecution, and he ended up in Egypt. In 1897, he moved to Paris and enrolled in literature at the prestigious Sorbonne University. He was captivated by philosophy and Middle Eastern literature. He had to work various jobs pursuing his studies because of his hard financial situation. He developed many ties with well-known Armenian personalities in Paris. He enjoyed reading in French, Armenian, and he read many of the best works of his time. From Paris, he moved to Geneva in Switzerland, and he worked for the newspaper Troshak Journal, which was the organ of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation. His first poetic works were published in this newspaper under the headlines of Tutsaz Noren, in English maybe, heroically, and Aspedin Yerka, the Knight's Song. The paper was established outside the Ottoman Empire so that it could freely criticize the Turkish authorities and to try to get international attention for the plight of the Armenians. Siamanto joined the cause and truly believed in an Armenia free of Turkish oppression. Henceforth, many of his works and poems were highly nationalistic. Eventually, one of his famous works, which was translated into English, was Garmir Lurer Paregames, or Bloody News from My Friend. His works comprise of the following volumes: Heroically, Tüzaznoren, which was published in 1902 in Paris. It was a book about the hardship of Armenians living under the harsh Ottoman rule. In it, Siamanto encouraged the youth to stand up for their rights and demand equality and justice. Next book is Hokevarki Huysi Chaher. In English, maybe we can translate Torches of Spiritual Behavior and Hope. Was released in 1907, described in stunning detail scenes of massacres, blood, and pain. He portrayed the deep thoughts and the feelings of the victims and their daily torment. As I said, the next book was Bloody News from My Friend, Garmir Lurer Paregames, was written right after the massacre of Adana, 1909. It is a poetic work reflecting the pain the author felt for his fellow countrymen. Next, Homeland's Invitation, or Hayreni Heraver, was printed in 1910 and released in the United States. He wrote about his yearning for his country and encouraged Armenians living abroad to return to their native land. One of his last books was Mesrop Mashtod, published in 1913, dedicated to the creator of the Armenian alphabet. Siamanto was a pioneer in Armenian poetry. His style was new and unique, and the methodology was very personal. His poems and writings go beyond the pain. He wrote about hope, freedom from oppression, and possibility of a better future. His ideas also went to revolutionary themes and revenge for the murdered. Siamanto had two sides to his writing, one of lamentation and the other of resistance. It is from this ideology of resistance that his revolutionary beliefs emerge. He was convinced that the road to salvation for his people was through armed struggle. He was hoping to ignite revolutionary generation of Armenians. In 1910, Siamanto moved to the United States and found employment at Hyrenic Weekly. 3 years later, he visited the city of Tbilisi. On his way to his destination, he visited many famous Armenian landmarks such as Mount Ararat, Khorvirab, and Echmiadzin. And in 1915, he was murdered during the Armenian genocide. One of the poems which will be read to you in English is called The Dance, which is taken from a book called Bloody News from My Friend. The book laments the 1909 massacres in Adana, Giligia, or Cilicia, which were also covered by other writers like Zabel Yesayan, Surem Bartevian, and Daniel Varujan. Upon reading letters by Dr. Diran Balakian, who was sent to Adana from Istanbul to help the victims, Siamanto was inspired to write his book of poems full of horrors. Dr. Balakian's grandson, the poet Peter Balakian, has translated these poems into English. It is a daunting task to translate Siamanto's poetry in any other language because of his convoluted and effervescent style, illuminated by the lightning of imagery and empowered by a dynamic torrent of newly coined poetic adjectives and adverbs. Balakian has made a decent job adding to the book an introduction of historic perspective. It would have been a shame to keep Siamanto's poetry captive to the language barrier. Balakian writes in his introduction, he was, meaning Siamanto, a poet whose identity and art were deeply bound up in his people and their political crisis. In this sense, he is a poet whose cultural situation bears resemblance to those of Yeats, Neruda, or Whitman during the Civil War. He meant what they meant or have come to mean to their cultures. He was a poet whose romance with his language and moral conviction about his people's plight were inseparable. Like Whitman, he believed that a bard is to be commensurate with the people, and Siamanto was a poet of bardic affinities. He was a public poet who declaimed his poems before audiences and crowds, continuing an Armenian bardic tradition that had medieval roots and probably been exemplified and known in the life and poetry of the 18th century poet Sayat Nova. Writing about Mesrop Mashtots, Siamanto makes the following analogy addressing to Mesrop, the creator of the Armenian alphabet. Mesrop, you stand tall against the Armenian centuries as a rock of diamond. Returning the compliment to the martyred poet, we can say, Siamanto, you stand tall against the Armenian centuries as a rock of diamond. Thank you.
I must tell you what I saw, so people will understand the crimes men do to men for 2 days by the road to the graveyard. Let the hearts of the world understand it was Sunday morning, the first useless Sunday, dawning on the corpses. From dawn to dusk, I had been in my room with a stabbed woman, my tears wedding her death. When I heard from afar a dark crowd standing in a vineyard, lashing 20 brides and singing filthy songs. Leaving the half-dead girl on the straw mattress, I went to the balcony of my window, and the crowd seemed to thicken like a clump of trees. An animal of a man shouted, "You must dance, dance when our drums beat." With fury whips cracked on the flesh of these women. Hand in hand, the brides began their circle dance. Now I am with my wounded neighbor, because with a calm snore, she cursed the universe and gave up her soul to the stars. Dance, they raved, dance till you die, infidel beauties. With your flapping breasts, dance, smile for us. You're abandoned now, you're naked slaves, so dance like a bunch of sluts. We are hot for your dead bodies. 20 graceful brides collapsed. Get up, the crowd screamed, brandishing their swords. Then someone brought a jug of kerosene. Human justice, I spit on your face. The brides were anointed. Dance, dance, they thundered. Here is a fragrance you can't get in Arabia. With a torch, they set the naked brides on fire, and the charred bodies rolled and tumbled into their deaths. I slammed my shutters, sat down next to my dead girl, and asked, how can I dig up my eyes?